What I do is sometimes very confusing for people. I work at the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development, which in and of itself is a mouthful. But I also coordinate the Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership, which is one of 8 partnerships for regional invasive species management in New York State. Basically, what happened in 2005, New York State recognized that invasive species were an up-and-coming issue. It was going to be important in the future to have a framework in place for the state to be able to deal with new invasives as they were coming in, as well as the invasive species that we already have. And so they formed 8 of these prisms, we call them. And this is the coverage of the state. I work to coordinate the Catskill prism, or CRISP, and right here we are in the Lower Hudson prism right now. Currently, 4 of the prisms are funded, so my prism, CRISP, as well as the Adirondack prism, APIP, and the Long Island prism, LISMA, as well as the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario prism, or SLELO, have a contract with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to coordinate partners, and we have many partners, but some of our principal partners are the Catskill Center, Catskill Forest Association, County Soil and Water Conservation District, Cornell Cooperative Extension, the Nature Conservancy, Department of Transportation, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, Watershed Agricultural Council, the DEC, as I mentioned, National Park Service, and Department of Agriculture and Markets. So all of these big time players are coming together, and they all sit around a table, and I sit at the head of the table, and we talk about what we're going to do about invasive species in our region. And at one of those meetings, we came up with these top 10 invasive species. So these are the species that I get paid to talk about. There's plenty of other ones that I'd love to talk to you about today. We'll see if we have time at the end. But these are the ones that we decided were a priority for the Catskills. Some of the species are pretty prevalent here in the Hudson Valley. Some of them aren't, so it's a little bit different for your region, but I can give you some idea of what's going on. All right, so our top 10 species, I've broken them out by where they live, so their habitat. The first group that I'm going to talk about are upland terrestrial plants. These are herbaceous species, and they tend to live on forest edges or even in gardens. We have giant hogweed, which I think some of you have heard of and may have seen some graphic photos relating to. If you have a weak stomach, you may want to leave the room at some point. Mile-a-minute vine, which was mentioned, and pale and black swallowwort, which are actually 2 different species in the same genus, but we kind of lump them together because it's hard to tell the difference. And it doesn't really matter which one you've got. So first up, giant hogweed. This is a monster of a plant. It can grow so tall. It has a very interesting lifestyle, different life stages. It grows generally like a biennial would with a rosette followed by a bolting flower. But it isn't a biennial. It's really more of a perennial because the life cycle takes 3 to 4 years to complete. In the first year, you're going to get a really small little seedling, like you see at the top of the screen there. You may not even notice it. The second year, and possibly the third year, you get a larger rosette that you see in the bottom there. And then in the 3rd or 4th year, it bolts up, creates a giant umbrella of a flower. It's also in the carrot family. It's related to carrots and parsnip, so it may look familiar to some of you. You can identify it because it's 8 to 15 feet tall. There aren't that many flowers out there that are that tall or even close. So if you see a really big flower, you should be keyed into this species. The leaves are 3 to 5 feet across, so really large. It looks like you're in Jurassic Park when you see this. It's out of this world. And the leaves are compound, so they have multiple leaflets on a single stem coming out of the plant. The flower head is 2.5 feet across, so I wasn't joking about umbrella. It's really like an umbrella made up of like flower that looks like Queen Anne's lace. People have called this plant Queen Anne's lace on steroids. So big flower made up of multiple rays, and there's some lookalikes that have fewer rays, but this one has 50 to 150 rays per flower head. So many, many little flowers all together in this giant umbrella, and a purple speckled hollow stem. And the really sad thing about this plant is because it has this big hollow stem, kids are prone to pick it up and put it up to their eye, and that can actually lead to blindness. So it's pretty tragic, really. It does have some native lookalikes that you might mistake it for. The closest one is cow parsnip. They're very closely related. Cow parsnip is a native plant. As you can see, the flowers are much smaller. The stem doesn't have purple spots, but it is hairy, similar to the giant hogweed. And the seeds are very similar, but the cow parsnip seed is more heart-shaped, and the giant hogweed seed is much more oval. If you see this when it's not in bloom throughout the year, the flower head will stay. So even in the winter, you can tell the difference because you can see the seeds still stuck on the flower head. So that's something good to look for if you think you might have it. Other lookalikes are angelica and poison hemlock. Both of these have smooth stems, so their stem doesn't have any of those little hairs on them. And those little hairs are actually what will break off and get the toxin on your skin, which can cause severe burns, which we'll look at in just a minute. They also have much smaller flowers. Angelica, the flower head is like a softball size and shape. Poison hemlock, much more delicate, and much more delicate leaves as well. The distribution of giant hogweed in New York State is centered around Rochester. It was actually brought into Rochester as an ornamental, planted in their botanic garden. They thought it looked pretty cool. It does, but there's some nasty side effects. So since then, it's been spread throughout New York as well as the rest of the Northeast by gardeners who see the flower, think it looks cool, and plant it in their garden or give it to a friend. And we're still dealing with plants that are being spread that way. Someone planted it purposely in their garden, had no idea what the consequences would be. And it's too bad. So right now, there are no known occurrences in Westchester County. It's got a pretty decent sized population in Putnam County, so it's likely that it could be here and we just don't know about it. So this is definitely one to keep an eye out. If you go over to a friend's house who's an avid gardener, look in their garden, they may have planted it. We just found it in Ulster County for the first time this past year. So this is the graphic stuff I was mentioning. The sap isn't actually burning your skin. It creates a photosensitivity. So when your skin has sap on it and then the sun hits your skin, that's what's causing the severe burn, as well as blindness if it's in your eye. So when we work to control this plant, we have to wear a full Tyvek suit, gloves, goggles, boots, whole 9 yards, and then you go home and shower right after you take care of it. And we do it in the evening, so we don't have a risk of exposure to the sun. So the one on the bottom, I believe this was a woman in Putnam County who had it in her garden and got a little bit of sap on her leg. And for months afterward, you could see the scars. That spot will forever be more prone to sunburn, so it's a lifelong affliction. Ecologically, this is an important species. I mean, if the health risk isn't enough for you, ecologically, it's a really strong competitor. Those giant flowers and giant leaves shade out everything from underneath them. You see this with a lot of invasive plants that are bigger and taller than the natives. They just shade everything out. And then the soil was more prone to being washed away in a big rain event because there aren't those little roots holding the soil in place. And giant hogweed does like moist environments, so it can be found around streams and ponds. And so it could potentially lead to a decrease in water quality. The efforts that are going on in New York State, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has a giant hogweed control program. Their funding was severely cut this year. They still have a hotline, so if anyone sees it, you can call the hotline. tons of brochures over here. They have the hotline number in there. In an effort to kind of help them out, the Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership is controlling all of the sites in our region. So I have a box of 25 Tyvek suits. I hope that gets me through the season. And we're controlling all of the sites. That's me with my intern last year. That was our largest site in Sullivan County, where someone had planted it in a bed in their yard. And they gave seeds to their sister and their neighbor, so it was all over the neighborhood. Yep. So we do control sites that have fewer than 400 plants. We cut the flower heads off so the seeds don't get spread around anymore. And then we'll also use a shovel to cut the smaller rosettes at the top of the root, and that kills the plant. And even if there are no plants found at a site, we'll still come back for 3 years just to make sure that none of the seeds are sprouting. And for larger sites, they do use herbicide to control them. We don't do that, and we don't have any large sites in our region. But near Rochester, they have many big sites. So the next one up is mile-a-minute vines.
Quick question on that.
Sure.
I saw a pair of loppers being used. Is the poison on the lopper head as well?
Yeah, so you have to wash everything. We have a portable jug with soapy water that we wash everything off with. Yep.
You said it escaped from cultivation in Rochester.
Right.
How long ago?
That was about 100 years ago. Yes. Many of these invasives are around for a long time, and then they'll take off all of a sudden. It's sort of like exponential growth. Once you have a few in a few places, they're making tons of seeds, and then it's going to create this explosion after the fact. So that's what we're starting to see now.
Where was its origin?
It's from the Baltic area, Russia. Similar climate to here, so it does well here. Yes?
So, if there's no consortium down in the lower Hudson area, we find these on our properties or something?
The DEC will come and control it for you.
Okay.
They're happy to do it. They like to have willing landowners. Some people don't want them to control it. They like it.
Got it. Okay.
So, yeah, they're more than willing. Okay, yes?
It's like an annual, basically.
It acts like a biennial, so it has a rosette, and then this next year.
By eliminating the seeds, you're only eliminating
There still could be more coming, right? Yep. All right, so mile-a-minute vine, I spent a year of my life focused on this one species. This one's an annual, so it dies every year, thank goodness. But it does produce a lot of seeds, and it produces seeds all throughout the summer, which is sort of different than a lot of our native species that produce seed at once. This one you can identify fairly easily. The leaves are an equilateral triangle, so it looks like a perfect triangle. And it also has these different circular leaves that surround the stem. They're called an ochrea. I think I have, there we go. So circular leaf around the stem and downward pointing barbs. So you know on a rose bush, the spines come straight out. These are like a hook, so they hook onto things like Velcro. If you're walking through a patch of this, it'll just be all over you from top to bottom. And it has these bright blue berries. They look really tasty. I tried one, didn't taste like anything. And I've read that they really have no nutritional value, so the animals that are filling up on them, they aren't getting any nutrients from those berries, and they're spreading the seeds all over, which is great. They will start turning blue in June or July, but again, all throughout the summer, new berries are forming. We do have some native lookalikes. There's a family of tear thumb species that are sort of similar. There's arrow-leafed and halberd-leafed tear thumbs. They have much smaller spines. Does this work? No. You can see the stem just kind of looks prickly. It doesn't have that downward curvature to it. And the shape of the leaf is a little different. It's more like an arrowhead or something. And one of them and the other one is much more circular. So I think it's pretty easy to identify it, but I looked at it for a year, so it may not be that easy. What mylaminate will do is create a dense mat. It really likes to hang out along forest edges, power line right-of-ways. It just will move right along that edge and create an impenetrable mat. So you really can't walk through it. It's gonna tangle you all up. And it's shading out every other forest edge species that would be there. And the root system is also very shallow, so it's easy to pull it out, which is good if you are doing a mile-a-minute pull, which I did many of, but it's not good for holding the soil in place. So again, if there's a big storm event, the soil can all wash away. So the mile-a-minute project of the Hudson Valley still exists. They are working through the Hudson River Environmental Research Institute, Henry, and work with a bunch of different partners to do control. So if you do know of a site, it's important to report it so they can get control efforts in place. This species is pretty prevalent around Bear Mountain on the Iona Island, right near Bear Mountain, as well as along the road there. And it has been found in a few sites in Westchester County. Ward Pound Ridge has a really big population that they're trying to control. They used sheep there, actually, to do some control work. Targeted grazing. They pen the sheep in a patch of it, and they kind of eat away at it over time. It's pretty cool. The hand pulling, as I mentioned, it's really easy to do. It's pretty effective, but the seed bank stays around for 7 years. So even if you have all of them, you have to go back for 7 years to make sure that nothing's going to grow back. So a lot of work. Herbicide can be used on it. And there's also a new, relatively new biocontrol species. This is a tiny species of weevil that feeds on the vine. The larvae tunnel into the stem of the vine and kill it. And that one was released in New York for the first time, I think, 2 years ago, and it's continuing to be released. So that's good news on the control front.
What's controlling the weevil?
The weevil is entirely host specific. It won't feed on anything else. So when it runs out of mile-a-minute, it will die. They do what's called no-choice host experiments. So they put it in a tank with a bunch of different closely related species, and if it feeds on those closely related species, it's ruled out as a potential biocontrol agent. So it's pretty strenuous, the work that they do to make sure that nothing happens.
I was reading about that herbicide that works with this is pretty effective. They were using it in Connecticut, that it was promising.
Yeah, there's some good work that can be done with herbicides. So some people want to use them, some people don't. Mile-a-minute, it is really easy to pull it out. It's not like some of the species, swallowwort, which I'll be talking about, you can't pull it out. So it's definitely a choice for whoever's trying to deal with it. Mile-a-minute came from East Asia. Again, the same climate. They're pretty well adapted for life in New York. All right, so the swallowwort species, we have black and pale swallowwort. Without seeing the flower, it's pretty much impossible to tell them apart, and they behave so similarly, you really don't need to tell them apart for any other reason other than curiosity. They are a perennial vine, so unlike mile-a-minute, they don't die back every year. They have a large root system, and the roots have nodes at the top. So if you do try and pull it out, 3 more are going to grow back where that one was. You don't want to do that. We'll talk more about that. You can identify this one. It has opposite leaves. They can go from a range of shapes from very round to very oblong, oval shape. They're very glossy, thick leaves. They are toxic, so you don't necessarily want to do any targeted grazing with this species. They did an experiment with a goat They fed it swallowwort for 3 days and it died. So yes, this is not a candidate for pulling or grazing, which makes it that much harder to deal with. The leaves are about 3 to 4 inches, and it has a very twining stem. It wraps around everything very quickly. Another name for this species is dog strangling vine, and I've heard that that's because of the choking effect of the toxin, and I've also heard that it's because they get wrapped up in it. And my dog actually ran into a patch of this and couldn't really get out, so I can vouch for that. You start seeing these seed pods. I think they look like beans, personally, but other people have said they look like other things. They're related to milkweed, so they have that fluffy seed material inside, like a milkweed seed pod would have. And it produces hundreds of them. Each vine will have 100 seed pods in it, and each seed pod will have thousands of seeds in there. So you can see how it could grow pretty quickly and spread very well. The seeds can blow miles away. So once you have this in an area, it's there and it's going to spread fast. The only real lookalike we have is milkweed, which is very different looking, so it shouldn't be that hard to identify it. The milkweed seed pod has all the little spikes on it. The swallowwort seed pod is perfectly smooth, so very different. Just like mile a minute, this will also create these dense mats and create an impenetrable barrier along forest edges. So it's shading out all kinds of native species. I did a mile a minute pull once, and there were a few mile a minute plants in a sea of swallowwort. So it can outcompete mile a minute, which is impressive. Again, the toxic factor to this vegetation is bad for all sorts of wildlife. It's not a food source for anything.
Where is this from?
Also Asia. Yep. So for control, you really are limited to herbicide. Another problem is when you do treat it with the herbicide, little ones will grow back from the node, and they're going to be smaller than the grass and the other ambient vegetation, so it'll be very hard to detect them. So in a controlled experiment that the Nature Conservancy has been doing, they have found that even if they go back multiple years to the same site, there's still going to be little plants that they miss. They're never going to get them all. It's virtually impossible to eradicate this species. Again, don't try and pull it by hand. You're just going to make more. You just make it angry. And the one really good thing that you can do if you do have this on your property is to go out in the spring and summer and cut those seed pods off, because at least then it's not going to spread thousands of new plants all around your neighborhood.
Do you recommend a certain herbicide?
For the homeowner, glyphosate. The glyphosate Roundup. Yeah.
Is that local to Westchester County? Is that found?
This is found, yes, it is found in Westchester County. It's found pretty well across the state. It's such a good disperser, it's gotten everywhere. So we have it in the Catskills, and you have it here. It's all throughout Western New York. The distribution varies pale versus black, but it doesn't really matter. They're all bad. So next up, I have a few, two woody species for you, a tree and a vine. The tree is Norway maple, which is pretty common. For us in the Catskills, it's more of a big deal because forestry is such an important industry in the Catskills, and people are very concerned about the changing composition of our forests. In this area, it's everywhere. There's not much you can do. There's one right in front of the library here and several behind it, so it's here. And then we also have Asiatic bittersweet. Again, this one's not common in the Catskills, but is pretty much everywhere here, and not too much you can do about it.
So that has the,
Untrue.
Well, I'll talk about what you can do about it.
just some of the orange and red berries.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So starting off with Norway maple, this one was introduced and widely planted as a shade tree along streets. It's pretty extraordinary at providing shade, and all of these invasives, you have to give them credit. They're really good at what they do. That's why they became invasive. So this one is providing all this wonderful shade for your sidewalk, but also in the forest is providing so much shade that it shades out everything else. You can identify this one. The bark is pretty distinct. It's a sort of rough diamond-shaped pattern to the bark, and it's opposite branching. All maple species have opposite branches, so the twigs are coming off across from each other. And what's kind of cool is this one has milky sap that comes out of the leaf petiole, and I have some here we can pass around so you can see this firsthand. So when you squeeze the base of the leaf petiole, white goop comes out. And if it's a sugar maple, which looks very similar, that won't happen. If you want to pass these around. It's a pretty surefire test to see if it's a Norway maple. And you can also, sometimes you can just tell by looking at the canopy of the tree, it's so dense that you know it's a Norway maple. Oops. So there are some native lookalikes. The sugar maple looks very similar. The leaf on the sugar maple has the 3 large lobes and 2 small ones. The Norway maple has 5 large lobes. And the sugar maple's bark starts to peel from the sides along the edges. It's not that same diamond pattern, and it has a much more sparse canopy. And just to compare, that's the sugar maple leaf on the left and the Norway maple leaf on the right. But I always just pluck a leaf off and squeeze the end. So as I mentioned, it's shading out everything in the forest understory. It's not what we want to see for forest regeneration. Removal is an option. If you have one in your yard, you may want to remove it because it's probably going to shade out everything you're planting in your garden. Might even kill your grass. The leaves, that milky substance in the leaves is a little bit toxic to everything. So as the leaves are decomposing, they're kind of killing everything too. So it's getting them coming and going. Also, don't plant them. If you are deciding to plant some trees in your yard, don't choose the Norway maple. There are several cultivar varieties that are sold at nurseries to this day. There's the crimson one, which has beautiful red leaves. I recommend choosing a native species instead. It will be more harmonious for your whole garden. And moving on to the Asiatic bittersweet. This one is a woody vine. It's a long-lived vine. And it does have red and yellow berries. Sorry, the color is quite off there, but they are bright red and yellow. They come out green when they first appear. The leaves are glossy and thick. Right now, at this time of year, they're not that thick because they're just coming out, but they will get much shinier. They grow alternately on the vine, and the vine itself has tree-like bark, so it's very woody. The berries will grow all along the stem, and our native bittersweet, American bittersweet, the berries just grow at the very end of the vine, so that's how you can tell the difference. Generally speaking, you probably have the Asian variety. It's outcompeting our American bittersweet, and it's even been shown in some cases to hybridize. So it's getting its genes in there one way or another. And I do have a sample we can pass around. This was growing just here in the backyard, so it's pretty prevalent. Oops. And you can see it's twining around this I think it's a Norway maple branch.
Way to go.
So, yeah. It's a battle of the invasives back there. So you might confuse this one for some of our native woodier vines. We have Virginia creeper. That one has 5 leaves. Poison ivy. If you learn one thing tonight, I hope it's to identify poison ivy, because that could help you out. Leaves of 3, let it be. Don't be a dope. Don't touch the hairy rope. And these vines are different. They're not going to twine around the tree. They will grow straight up it. The poison ivy has the aerial roots that just kind of stick to the tree bark like Velcro. Virginia creeper is sort of similar. It's pretty much going straight up the tree. And we also have grapevine, which you've probably seen, that has much flakier bark than the bittersweet. And you also have porcelain berry here, which has a very different leaf. So. The problem with bittersweet mainly is that it's killing the trees. It's choking them. The extra weight of having that vine in the tree canopy is a lot of stress on the tree, and it can actually pull trees down. So it's doing a lot of damage. The birds are also eating the berries, which are also low nutrition berries, so they are going to be eating more of them, spreading more seed, and they're not getting those calories that they need. It can spread both by seed and the roots creep along and spread that way. So shading out everything else. Control. Shout out to the vine cutters. A lot of good work that's being done along our parkways. Basically what you have to do is cut out a section of the vine. Otherwise, the part that you cut is just going to regrow. And even if you do cut them, they're going to sprout some more. So it's a continued effort, and I'm very impressed by the work that the vine cutters are doing, volunteer work that's going into saving some of the trees in this area. Purple loosestrife, a beautiful flower. This was spread by the nursery industry, planted in gardens, along ponds. It is beautiful. And it's a perennial. It has a square stem, 5 to 6 sided. Let's see. Here we go. The stems can reach 5 to 9 feet in height. The flowers start to appear in June and will stick around till September. So you will very often see these purple flowers. The color on here is much bluer. It's actually more towards the pink side of the spectrum. And we do have some native lookalikes. The blue vervain is similar but much bluer in real life. And fireweed, which is much pinker in real life. Again, the color is way off here. The problem with purple loosestrife is the root system actually disrupts the flow of water. It creates kind of like dams in waterways and really can soak up a ton of water. The control methods are to dig it out. A huge physical effort is needed for that. There is also a biocontrol, the Gallericella beetle, which will feed on the plant and is very effective in controlling it at this point. It's been around for close to a decade, I think. So it's shown to work, and herbicide as well.
Would you say that name of that building?
It's the Gallericella beetle. I can send you more information if you're interested. I think they are for sale if you would like to buy some.
And it's all right to introduce.
Again, it went through years and years of all these experiments, making sure that it would only eat the purple loosestrife. So there's a unique relationship between certain insects and their host. And sure, evolution can happen. It takes a long time, and there's a very slim chance that it would switch over to a native species. Okay, so Japanese knotweed, we can pass this one around. These are pulled from the end of Cleveland Drive, so they didn't come from very far. I've seen them just driving around town today by the picture tunnel at Senasqua. It's cropping up all over. This plant can reproduce from virtually any part of the plant. A single leaf plucked off can create a whole new plant. And it's actually believed that all of the Japanese knotweed in Britain is a single genetic individual, so it's a giant clone that covers the entire island. And people have said that it might be the largest organism in the world. There's all kinds of things like that, but it's pretty bad over there, and it's bad here too. Very bamboo-like stem, as you'll see. Some people confuse it with bamboo. The leaves have a pointy end, and they're very round at the base. It has a very simple white flower. There aren't very many things that look like it. Bamboo, as soon as you see the leaves, you know it's bamboo. The American basswood tree, the sapling has a similar shaped leaf, but it's a woody stem, and so it's nothing like it, really. And a big problem is that it's weakening your stream banks. In the Catskills, this is a huge problem. As you probably have heard, we have some severe flooding issues. And when a stream bank is composed mainly of Japanese knotweed, its large roots aren't going to hold that soil in place. So the entire stream bank can just wash away easily. It's also limiting access for recreation. We have in the Catskills a big fishing kind of recreation industry, and this could be a really big problem, as well as shading out everything that's underneath it. There's a variety of control techniques for Japanese knotweed. I'm going to say none of them are easy. They're all hard, but with persistence, you can eliminate individual patches. It's not a species that we're ever going to eradicate from the state or the region. It's going to be around forever just because it's such a super reproducer. Some people like to use an injection tool. Some people will cut it back at a certain time of year and then spray an herbicide on it. You can just spray the leaves themselves. Various results have emerged for each of these methods. And in some areas, they're just mowing it every couple weeks. And that's one way to deal with it. You're not getting rid of it. You're just mowing.
Meredith, is this the same plant that I've heard referred to as false bamboo?
I haven't heard that name, but it could be.
Anybody know?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to some aquatic species. Yeah?
It's edible when it's...
It is. Yes. You have to be careful what it's growing in. I made a knotweed pie out of some that was growing in sand, and it was pretty gritty. So you want to pay attention to that.
Is it also known as pokeweed, or is that not?
That's very different. Yep. Okay, so some aquatic species, those of you who have ponds, this may be of particular interest. Didymo is one that is impacting our streams in the Catskills pretty heavily. Eurasian water milfoil, this one can be found in ponds. It likes slow-moving water, so a wide meandering stream would be a fine habitat for this. It has long stems. They're up to 3 meters long. And the leaves are whorled in sets of 4 with 12 to 21 pairs of leaflets. It has that whorled pattern, and it's pretty different than our native species. The native lookalike we have is coontail. If you look closely, it's pretty different. The control methods that are used for Eurasian water milfoil are hand harvesting, very labor intensive, mechanical harvesting, herbicide, and there are some biocontrol species. I believe the moth and the weevil are native species that feed on it, so you can buy quantity of them that have been reared and then release them, and also grass carp, which are not native, but do feed on them. And apparently there's a sterile grass carp that you can purchase, but things that are supposed to be sterile, it often turns out they're not. So that one I would be more concerned about. Skip that. So the next one is water chestnut. You've probably seen this in the Hudson. If you haven't seen the plant, you've seen the seed pod. They're those black nuts. People call them devil heads. You've probably known someone who stepped on one. There's the nut there. So the floating rosette is what's producing those nuts. They tend to hang out in the bays along the Hudson, but they're also showing up in small ponds. The nuts get caught in birds' wings or in Canada geese. They'll transport the nut, and then the plant will grow in whatever water body that bird visits next. Nothing really looks like it. So there you go. You can hand harvest. It's pretty easy to pull it out. Then you have to figure out how you're going to dispose of it. You can do mechanical harvesting on certain water bodies. They do that regularly just to keep it in control. Or you can apply an herbicide as well. And let's see, last one we have is didymo or rocksnot. And this one is not such an issue in this region. In the Catskills, it has become a really big issue in the past few years. It's believed that what we have is actually a native algae that has gone through some sort of mutation and now is reproducing in a sort of out of control way. It's this single-celled organism, and it has this arm that comes out of the cell, and what used to be just kind of a little arm has now grown into meters long, and that's what's creating these tangles of this woolly-like substance. And you can see it's not fun to deal with if you're in the stream. It probably wouldn't cover you like that, but maybe. And it's creating this dense mat all the way across the bottom, depriving all of the little critters that live under the rocks of oxygen. It's just smothering them. And those are the food that feed the fish like trout, which are hugely important to the economy in the Catskills. And you can identify it, it's tan to brown in color. It's really the only algae that's gonna create this mat, so that is a dead giveaway. Our native lookalike is, the closest thing we have is a filamentous algae, and that's kind of stringier, slimier, and will be more towards the surface, not on the bottom. And there's really no way to control it. Once it's in a stream forever. The idea right now is to slow the spread down so it's not in every stream right away. And the method is clean, check, dry. If you do any fishing in the Catskills, it's good to know if the didymo is in that stream. And if it is, and you're going to be going to another stream, any boots or waders or nets, fishing gear, clean it, let it dry, and make sure you're not spreading it to the next stream. So that is it.